Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, and for today's video, we are going to be looking into yet another urban legend. And I don't know why, but I have been completely fascinated with these urban legends that I've been researching and making videos on lately. I just find it really interesting how different towns and places have these urban legends that are surrounding them. Helps you to just learn a little bit more about the history of a certain place and how people perceive stories that have been told over sometimes generations, which is the case for today's video. And the subject of this video is going to be on the urban legend of Hannah Cranna. Now, the story of Hannah Cranna is definitely not your typical burning of the witch story. In fact, the Wicked Witch of Monroe was said to have lived a fairly normal, decent life up in New England. But there were many whispers about this woman, whispers accusing their neighbor of practicing black magic. This is the urban legend of Hannah Cranna. Hannah Hovey was born in 1783 and lived on a farm on Craigley Hill in Monroe, Connecticut, which had a population of around 1,000 people, where she lived with her husband Joseph. We don't know a lot about Hannah's early life, and even the details surrounding her adult life are quite murky, but it's been said that she and her husband did not have any children, but they still lived a decent, normal, happy life. Although it was believed that Hannah had what was described as being a difficult personality. She was just kind of an outspoken and bold woman. On one occasion, Joseph went out for a nightly walk and met his unfortunate end by somehow falling off a cliff. Now, Joseph Hovey was a captain, and nobody in town believed that Joseph would have been so foolish as to perish under those circumstances. So rumors began spreading that it was in fact his wife Hannah who was responsible for Joseph's death, by using witchcraft upon him to disorient and confuse him to the point where he tripped and fell to his death. Hannah never remarried and was said to have dressed in black for the remainder of her life in mourning, most notably in a long, flowy skirt that would flitter about in the wind. And these were times when women who were off the beaten path, who were a bit eccentric, especially those who were not married, were not regarded in the best light and were the focus of many of the accusations against those arrested and questioned in the Salem witch trials. So with Hannah already having more of an eccentric personality even before her husband's death, as well as only wearing black afterward, fueled the townspeople's beliefs that perhaps Hannah Hovey was a witch. And now that Hannah was a widow and without any money, apparently she began raising even more suspicions amongst her neighbors when she would demand things like food and firewood for survival, but would give little, if anything, in return. And if they didn't agree to help her out, she would supposedly threaten them with her witchy powers, trying to use the rumors the town was already spreading about her to her advantage. Sometimes nothing would even happen outright to the person that refused her, but when bad luck would find them, even if it was for something small, Hannah would be accused for it. She even earned the nickname Hannah Cranna, which at first I thought was derived from the word crone, but apparently Cranna is Scottish for a rocky place, which could have been taken from this rock that supposedly sat outside of Hannah's house that apparently had what was described as being the devil's footprints imprinted in the rock. But I mean, honestly, it could just be because it rhymed, like Hannah Montana. Other people in the community claimed that a man caught a fish on her property without asking for her permission to fish on her land prior, and it's been said that Hannah cast a curse upon him and this man never caught a fish again. Another story went that a neighbor was making some of her famous pies, and Hannah came by and asked if she could have one. The neighbor gave her the smallest one. When Hannah returned asking for something bigger, the neighbor told her no. It was said that after that, Hannah put a spell on her and her neighbor could never bake her famous pies ever again. In addition to those events, apparently 2 men stopped their cart outside Hannah's house, jokingly asking her to perform some magic for them, to which Hannah replied that before they passed this nearby tree, their wish would be granted. The men simply laughed and moved to be on their way, but their oxen refused to budge from their stop spot, and then the wheels of their cart just fell to the ground. So of course, that means that they were cursed by this evil witch. And I guess Hannah just kept this going, using these rumors of witchcraft to gain a sense of power within the community and culminating within the townspeople a sense of fear. It was said that Hannah lived in a house that had chickens on the property, but was also apparently protected by snakes to discourage intruders. And she would allegedly bewitch those who crossed her, but assisted those who were on her side. Whether out of fear or admiration, we will never know. But it has been said that one day a farmer came to her house begging desperately for her assistance. His crops were not growing properly due to the drought that had been plaguing the area for weeks. Hannah agreed to bring rain to his crops, but under one condition. The farmer had to pledge his soul to her. The farmer, in his desperation, apparently threw himself to her feet and offered her his soul. And that night, the sky opened in a rainstorm and the farmer's crops flourished. Even though the accusations that Hannah had been practicing witchcraft were well known within the community, Hannah was never brought to trials such as those who were accused in the Salem witch trials, which happened almost 100 years prior to Hannah being born. The thing about the Salem witch trials is that after the whole thing was over in 1693, the residents of New England found this whole thing to be such an embarrassment, saying that the government had merely gone crazy. And so even though 20 people were executed under the suspicion of witchcraft, nobody else was ever arrested, charged, or executed because of witchcraft after that. However, I read that Hannah was apparently arrested for witchcraft, but like I said, she was never brought to trial for this because thankfully people in law enforcement were becoming more enlightened about this. Hannah kept a rooster on her property named Old Boreas, who would loudly crow every night at the stroke of midnight, though some sources say it was actually 3 a.m., to the point where neighbors would set their clocks to the crowing of this rooster. And apparently Hannah felt so connected to Old Boreas that when it stopped crowing, as it usually did at the stroke of midnight, Hannah knew her own death was coming. She hastily gave her neighbor instructions that upon her death, her coffin must be carried to the graveyard by hand, and that she must not be buried before sundown. And if they did not comply, a curse would be laid upon them. And the next day, at the age of 77, in January of the year 1860, Hannah Cranna died. The townspeople attempted to follow her wishes, but since the weather was not the greatest, as it was the middle of a snowstorm, the locals decided that they would arrive in the afternoon and instead pull Hannah's casket along the snow on a sled towed by horses instead of carrying it. It would be much safer for them that way so they wouldn't slip and fall. But the strange thing was that as they began towing her coffin on the sled across the snow, Hannah's coffin would supposedly begin to shake, throwing the townspeople off of the sled onto the snow, making it appear as though Hannah was not pleased with her requests not being carried out properly. Even after strapping the coffin down with iron chains and having people sit on top of it, the coffin still came off the sled and slid all the way back to the front of her house. The locals repeatedly tried placing the coffin on the sled and making their way to the cemetery, but each time were met with the exact same issue, where Hannah's casket would fall off and somehow slide back to her front door. At this point, the locals were pretty sure that something was up, as it was clear that they believed in witchcraft from all of these rumors that had been spreading within the community. So they were nervous that this was Hannah messing with them from beyond the grave for not following her instructions on how to properly carry her coffin down to the cemetery. So they made the decision to hoist up Hannah Cranna's coffin and carry it all the way down to the graveyard. This was a difficult feat considering how much snow snow had accumulated on the ground throughout this time, but after a while they made it down to the cemetery and placed her coffin into its gravesite just after the sun had set, fulfilling her request of needing to be buried in the dark. Although there are some accounts that say that the men slipped while carrying her coffin into the graveyard, and then apparently Hannah's coffin just slid all the way right into its gravesite. So back to the story, the townspeople considered this as a job well done, applauding themselves for fulfilling the wishes of the deceased. The townspeople made their way back up to where Hannah used to live and were met with a terrifying sight. Hannah's house was engulfed in flames, although supposedly the basement of her house had not been touched by the fire, making the locals believe that her spirit was haunting that area of her property and was apparently the source of strange cries and moans that could be heard at night, thus cementing the legend of the Wicked Witch of Monroe and scorching the memory of Hannah Cranna into their minds for the rest of their lives. The tombstone of Hannah Hovey, which is said to be very well kept and well preserved, though I have read that it is a replica, lays in Gregory's Four Corners burial ground on Spring Hill Road in Trumbull, Connecticut, which is only a 15-minute drive away from Hannah's hometown of Monroe. It's said that sometimes the ghost of Hannah Cranna will appear amongst the tombstone, scaring passing drivers and causing them to crash right into the gravestone of Hannah Cranna, causing it to need to be replaced yet again. And even to this day, Hannah's story has been perpetuated into local lore, where apparently every Halloween her story is told by the library, and the Historical Society has put on events where you can meet Hannah, and someone dressed up as Hannah Cranna will share stories, and children are able to make mini pies with Hannah's neighbors. As well, Ed and Lorraine Warren, the incredibly popular paranormal investigators who worked on cases that sparked movies like The Haunting in Connecticut and The Conjuring, actually lived in Monroe and are both buried in that local cemetery. Personally, and as I've made nods to throughout this entire video, I think that Hannah was a grieving woman who was trying to deal with the death of her husband as best as she could. You shouldn't go walking at night where there are cliffs that you could potentially fall off of, so I definitely don't think that Hannah was responsible for bewitching her husband to fall to his death, and Hannah strikes me more as an individual who is bold and outspoken, an independent woman trying to deal with the loss of her husband and survive as best as she could, and was dealing with enough that she did not need the townspeople continuing to disrupt her. And we all know about the attitude people had toward free-thinking and confident women during that time period. So perhaps Hannah used these rumors of her being a witch to obtain food and firewood for her survival, and maybe she slowly sunk into seclusion over the years. Maybe her health was deteriorating and she just wanted somebody to at least notice when she died. So she spoke of a curse that she would lay upon the town if they did not follow her burial wishes. Everything I read about her just cloaks me in sadness, but also in admiration of this badass woman who reclaimed the word witch and flaunted it as a source of power. I honestly just see a woman who was doing her damnedest to survive on her own. But honestly, we will never truly know if Hannah Hovey really was a curse-casting witch, because she could simply be the face of a town's urban legend, with her true history of her life having absolutely nothing to do with any of this. Because as far as I can tell, there's really no proof cementing the details that I have explained in this video to Hannah Hovey's real life. She most likely had no dark magic to wield at all, but as with most urban legends, sometimes it's more fun to believe that it really is real.